it could and likely will get worse in the next couple of weeks, or at least maintain this very terribly high level of infections and deaths that we're seeing. And the reason is that, we're in that situation that we predicted a few weeks ago as you get into the holiday season and people have done a considerable amount of traveling. There's been congregate settings where people innocently and understandably were gathering for social and family get-togethers against the advice of public health officials like myself, even though it's very difficult to do that when you have a family-oriented season. And then you have the cold weather, people doing things indoors much more than outdoors. And this is what happens. It's terrible. It's unfortunate, but it was predictable that we were going to see the number of cases that we're seeing now. My concern is that it could get worse over the next couple of weeks as we see the lag that happens when an event occurs like the Christmas and New Year's holiday.
Fauci takes out, it's just 2 more weeks. We'll see 2 more weeks where we are. Crystal ball. This guy has been wrong so much that I have to wonder at this point. I'm sort of curious. When do we all agree that there's no reason to listen to this moron anymore? When? At what stage, at what point do we understand that everything that he tells us is either unnecessary because we already know it because it's so obvious, or just incorrect? His predictions all along have been wrong. Did he tell us that if we just mask, mitigate, social distance, that we would set all-time records? Somehow, let's be very clear about this. Somehow the disease was in the United States at least at the end of 2019. And yet we got into March and April where there was almost no mitigation to speak of in February, right over the winter time. We go into March and April, and they're telling us don't mask, and then there was a little bit of masking, and then we got into the first round of lockdowns. It's worse now by cases and by hospitalizations in a lot of places than it was then. And Fauci, he saw this coming? What was the point of all the measures? What was the point of all the lockdowns? Trump was somehow blamed for all this, as you remember. Coronavirus was entirely Donald Trump's fault. That's what we're told. Coronavirus was something that he didn't take seriously. He lied about. That's what they were telling us. What about the UK? What about Germany? What about France? What about all these other countries where they're having very similar scale problems to us? Do you know that there are about 200,000 people who have died of COVID-19 in Brazil, for example? Do you see that headline anywhere? No, you don't. Is that Donald Trump's fault? Is it because people don't social distance, they don't mask up, or is it something else? How is it that this is a policy? We're told that this is working when there's no metric you can show me that proves that any of this stuff actually works as a government policy. That's not the same thing as saying that theoretically some of these things would not prevent an individual from getting the virus. But on a massive scale with government mandates, how is this exactly functioning the way it was supposed to? Compared to what? They don't have any answers. But they just tell us you have to listen. They tell you that if you don't listen, you're a bad person. You're against the science. You're a problem, in fact. It's your fault, don't you see? All you have to do is listen to Saint Fauci and everything's going to get better. Here he is, the usual Saint Fauci coming back to us. Play 8.
I hope we don't have to do the lockdown because we all know, Chuck, how much COVID-19 fatigue there is of people just really being worn down with this. But we certainly need to enhance and make more uniform our public health measures. President-elect Biden has called for 100 days of everybody wearing a mask uniformly throughout the country. That's really a good start. The idea about locking down is something that you might have to do, but you want to avoid. In certain areas of the country, such as in California, which is really being stressed with regard to the hospital beds and the personnel who are really getting exhausted with the number of cases that are coming in, you may have to have, and they already have decided, on some form of lockdown in specific areas of the state or specific regions of the country. So that's not out of the question. We hope we don't have to do it countrywide, because we feel that if you adhere to the public health measures, you can turn things around.
National Fauci-ism. That's what we're heading toward. National Fauciite mandates and regulations. That's what he wants now. Let's be very clear about this. You and I are sitting here, and the normal human reaction to all this would be, they've got to see that this stuff doesn't do anything, right? They've got to see it. I mean, they've got to know. When I say this stuff, I'm not saying that a mask properly fitted, an N95 mask can't work. Of course this can help. Of course it can stop some degree of particles, some degree of spread under certain circumstances. But the government mandates, the way they're implementing these rules, absurd. I was on a plane coming back from Florida. Every 15 minutes, there's a make sure your mask is up and over your nose, very, very important, very important. I look around. Everyone's sitting there watching the TV screen in the back of the seat in front of them, munching on chips or whatever, masks down. Oh, okay. Well, I'm so glad that when they're entering the plane, they have the mask on, and then they sit there for an hour without their mask on. And by the way, I was one of them. I was sitting there drinking, and I'm like, these are the rules. It nullifies the rest of the rules. So that's what they don't understand, or they just pretend they don't understand. No intelligent person can see what's happening here, can see all these mandates and regulations in place and say, you know what? This really makes sense. This is good. And yet, what is Fauci saying? He's telling you that if we adhere to these measures, we can turn things around. That's not true. He's wrong. We keep seeing him be wrong. And yeah, this is a guy who really does, I think, enjoy his spotlight in history right now. I think he is a person who's gotten a little too in love with the whole country turning to him like he's the great godfather of our salvation during this virus. And it's not true. Really, really stunning. It's upsetting. It's upsetting at this point. I think everybody should see this for what it really is. We are in a period of mass delusion here. I mean, I can't tell you how many times outside in Florida, for example, and I can compare it to New York. So I'm now in a very locked down city. No restaurants open. No restaurants open. And I want to take the Snow Princess out to dinner tonight. Can't. I can't take her to a restaurant. It's her birthday. Happy birthday, Snow Princess. Can't take her out because there's no restaurants open here. Restaurants are open in Florida. Indoor dining, not even just outdoor, indoor dining. Crowded, booked. I had to go drive 30 minutes because I had a last-minute change of plans on New Year's Eve. I had to go 30 minutes to go to a good restaurant because everything was booked up, indoors and outdoors. Everyone's doing this. So shouldn't Florida, given that that's a regulation, a mandate that we have, shouldn't Florida be much worse? I mean, just overflowing ER, can't handle it, can't handle the cases, much worse than New York. That's not true. It's not. What about California? They were all about masking there. They were all about these lockdowns. They got rid of outdoor dining. Now, and this is really important, and I want to be clear about this one too. You have to remember, if there were limited measures here, if there were limited measures that were reasonable, it's much more likely that we would actually, limited and reasonable restrictions, we would say, okay. And I would complain about this a lot less. I'm not opposed to all restrictions. I don't think if you're sick, you should quarantine. If you're sick, you should stay away from people. And if you think you're sick or you've been exposed to somebody, you should also quarantine. I'm not crazy. Okay. But limited and reasonable restrictions versus unlimited and unreasonable ones. That's what we're dealing with right now. Unlimited restrictions that are unreasonable. And one of the best examples of this is, why won't Fauci say you don't have to wear a mask outside? If they were telling me, even with the absurdity of mask up indoors, unless you're eating on a plane unless you're eating at the restaurant. But I'd be more willing to, when I say deal with it, I don't mean I would agree with it, but I wouldn't be as furious, because I'm furious about this stuff, and you should be too, because millions of your fellow Americans, and many of you listening to this show right now, are suffering more than you should be by a lot because of jackasses like Fauci. But if he was just willing to say, every school should be open, full stop, they're safe, mask wearing outdoors is entirely unnecessary. If you want to do it, that's up to you, but do not impose rules and impose even social pressure on others to mask outside. I would say, okay, at least there's a willingness here to look at what's clearly true, but they won't even do that. So, I mean, I would see people that were out, laying out by the pool in Florida. We had great weather. It's beautiful. I mean, it was like an advertisement for why everybody should move to Florida from New York and California, which is what's happening. But you see people outside. They're laying outside in the sun for 2 hours, and then they would walk through they'd walk into the lobby of the hotel. They'd put their mask on to walk into the lobby, and then they'd sit in the lobby, order a drink from the hotel bar, take their mask off. Well, I'm so glad they're wearing a mask for about 30 seconds of, let's say, a 3-hour period, and the 30 seconds, they're not even near anybody. But this is the way that it's done. And this is from the hotels demanding it. Understand that. This is not a request or a suggestion from your peers. They're demanding this kind of behavior. It's absurd. And I don't know what we can do about this other than just keep fighting back and telling everybody the truth about it. Even though the social media companies want to lock us down and prevent us from having conversations about it, even though there's a fundamental lack of honesty around what we've been told and what is true when it comes to lockdowns. And then you have the virus and the vaccine. We have this vaccine. We're already into January here. The vaccine's been approved for almost a month now. Why are there all these slowdowns? Well, there's a reason for that, my friends. Let's get into it. Hey, Team Buck, thank you so much for watching The First on YouTube. If you like this video, please click that little thumbs up button so then it will log as liked. And also, if you want to see more great content from The First, please click subscribe.